Thank you. It's on. Like this we have.
Okay.
We're going to be recorded, so be careful with your words. Well, I'm going to introduce the session, see? That's true. Bé, escolteu, doncs, tenim avui l'immens honor de tenir dues persones que han treballat també en el camp de l'ecologia lingüística, que han volgut participar en aquest col·loqui doncs, que la professora Àngels Massip sobretot és la que ha impulsat. Gràcies a ella podem tenir avui doncs, aquest acte, i vam pensar que aprofitant que hi havia doncs, dues persones expertes amb visions distintes, no?, sobre l'ecologia lingüística, que fos interessant de fer un tet-a-tet, només que res, a veure, doncs, van dir coincidències i divergències, per veure doncs, en aquest camp, que no és ben bé un camp tampoc, però que són diverses persones que hem anat usant el terme ecologia de les llengües, però sense un fonament potser teòric comú. És un camp que comença com a tant no hi ha un consens establert, doncs seria interessant de veure com podíem contrastar, fer una mica d'avaluació d'aquest camp actualment, crítica, a veure si anem bé o no anem bé, si fem el que hem de fer o no, i en tot cas que hauríem de revisar o que seria quines pròximes preguntes o desafiaments tindríem en el camp. So welcome back. We are very happy to have you here this afternoon, this evening, because this is a schedule, very Mediterranean schedule, late afternoon, but it was the only possibility to have you here because we just were arriving right now. Okay, so I gave them guidelines for this seminar just in order to know what we're going to talk about. And I asked them two main questions and several sub-questions, let's say. But the first one, and they are going to answer 5 minutes, 5 minutes, the other one, about the questions or the topics, and then we can talk about in a dialogue. So I told them the goal of the seminar should be the evaluation of the development and present state of linguistic ecology as a scientific field, taking account of the different traditions and perspectives. We know that we're coming from, let's say, Hagen and Mackay and Hasler and Louis-Jean Calvet and Salikoko and Roland and myself, even if it's in Catalan, just a very restricted language, but we also thought something about ecology. So, well, let's say first question, then from the point of view of the whole of the field, has it been rewarding and useful, the option to build an ecology of language perspective? And why? So, who's going to start? You, Roland?
Okay, well, it has been rewarding in some way and useful in the sense that different scholars are trying to work on the same concept. But at this moment, it is still a metaphor, and in this way, I would like to use it just as a metaphor. For example, for myself, it was rewarding because I have used in a very common sense without defining and just complex realities and I think this is happening in most cases. There's no big definition, there's no definition of the different notions and concepts. Of course, there's some scholars are trying to do so. But this happened as well to language policy, for example, and social linguistics as well. There are a lot of notions. They were there. People use them, and then there was on the way they were defined. And another example is, for example, linguistics and semiotics. For example, Russia for a long time there was when they talked about semiotics, they were thinking in linguistics. This was especially in this, I think, the school of Tartu. Well, so in this way, I think we do not necessarily to reject linguistic ecology as a concept, because it's, as for example Monica Haller does, because I think it's something that has to be built on the way. And here is an example for trying to go on, trying to define the concept. And well, in which way we are using it? Well, to preserve something that should be static, well, that is, I think, not exactly the right way. Well, or just to analyze the situation and or a process that we would like to be in another manner. That would be the difference, the different kind of questions we should ask. If we, well, it's we have to see if ecology is a good thing or it does just happen.
Well.
Yeah. References to ecologies, to the ecology of language, are not so novel. You mentioned Einar Haugen, and before that, I think there were the Vogelins, who already in the 60s had invoked the notion of ecology. I think what has happened now is that with the topic of language endangerment and language loss, and thanks to things that people notice, say, in the rainforest, in the Amazon with deforestation. First, environmentalists notice the significance of ecology, how important it is to preserve ecology, because there are biotas that are being endangered. But in the process, too, anthropologists notice that it's not just animals that were becoming victims of deforestation. It was human beings, Native Americans, being relocated, being driven out of their traditional homes, and in the process losing their lives, losing their traditions, and losing their languages. And that actually caught the attention of linguists. So that's one particular group of people among linguists that became interested in the ecology, but some of them didn't even use the term ecology. A lot of people concerned with language endangerment don't even use the term ecology. In my particular case, I was working on the emergence of Creoles. And I became very dissatisfied with traditional accounts of the emergence of Creoles, because I came to the conclusion that Creoles are really telling us how to do better genetic linguistics. If you are interested with the question of the emergence of Creoles, Creoles are telling us everything that we have done wrong about genetic linguistics, like paying attention to population movements, paying attention to population contacts, paying attention to patterns of interaction among people when they come in contact, who sees who finds themselves obliged to accommodate who, and so forth. And it is at that point that by accident, I started reading the literature on ecology. And as I was doing this, it occurred to me that other than the interpretation of ecology that came from the Vogelins and from Einar Haugen, there was this other interpretation of ecology, especially in macroecology in biology, that is very significant. Because there you have to pay attention to whatever can count as environment for any living organism. And there I decided that it would probably be good to pay attention to what the ecology of a language must be. And the first part of that ecology is the human being, but in a kind of strange relationship with language. We appropriate language from other people, but we reshape it in the same time. We are both hosts and makers of the language varieties that we speak. And doing this, actually, something else caught my attention. Every now and then, my wife is very much interested in music, and we would watch a concert and so forth, and I would say, pay attention to how the musical instrument conditions how particular pieces of music are played. You can have the same song, but if you change the instrument, it changes a lot of things. Another thing that I had an opportunity to discuss with her, go to a group dance, like a square dance or something, and look how the human body actually creates beauty. It's not just the rhythm alone. When you look at the people, how they move their body together, you can see that everybody uses their own shape to create the beauty of dance. And there is something about language, that the human being and language, that makes it absolutely necessary to pay a lot of attention to how the human being reacts to the socioeconomic pressures, but also how the mind of the human being, the psychological state, actually filters the pressures from outside. But eventually, if you have to deal with the evolution of language, then you have to pay attention to how the human mind colonizes the human body to produce language. So there is a complex ecology here that you find in the human mind, that you find in the human anatomy, that are critical factors in shaping language as we speak it. But because a human being is embedded in that socioeconomic ecology, then you can understand the kinds of things that sociolinguists have been interested in trying to articulate how the social environment conditions or influences language as we learn it, but language as we reshape it. And since I was working on creoles, I learned something else, that actually there is a cascade of ecological determinism. And the way I came to think about it is putting the history of colonization in perspective. How the physical ecology actually determined the kind of economic ecology that was going to influence social interactions. So it's only in some places that Europeans use slave labor. And that slave labor was used especially for a particular kinds of crops like sugarcane, like coffee, and so forth, in the 17th, 18th century, when it was more cost-effective to use slave labor. And eventually you find out slavery was abolished not because people were so philanthropic, but because it was no longer economically sound to sustain slavery and things like that. But whatever it is, you have this cascade of ecological determinants: geographical ecology, socioeconomic ecology. And the socioeconomic ecology determine what size of a population, of the slave population, a plantation was supposed to have. And when the slave population became majority population, why it was necessary to institute segregation, and what were the consequences of segregation, and so forth. Now, another challenge. In those places like North America, where the white population of continental European origin is the majority, and the white population of English origin is the minority. How come the continental European population has not exerted on English the kind of influence that would be similar to the influence that the slaves exerted on English in North America? Then you have to learn to periodize the history of contacts and so forth. So ecology here becomes really a necessary heuristic for formulating a host of questions that we have not been addressing in order to account for language evolution, for language change, for the vitality of languages and so forth. That's how I see ecology. In a way, it's difficult, as Roland said, to come up with a crisp definition, but I think we are headed there. We are trying to grasp the different factors that bear on language change, on language evolution in general, that are significant, and that can lead us to come up with maybe an operational definition of what ecology is. It will vary from scholar to scholar. That's not such a bad thing, but as long as it is a useful heuristic, I think it's a very useful concept.
Thank you. Yeah, it reminds me that this morning, Professor Frederic Monet talked about the fuzzy concepts. So, and he says they are useful. Yeah. We don't need to define exactly the concepts, but just we need concepts that open our minds and address and provoke us to address new questions. So in that sense, we can go ahead with the ecology conceptualization, let's say, in order to discover more and more. I think that we can agree on that. Well, there was a second question that I was proposing here. If we have chosen the most pertinent questions, are we happy with our questions? What do you think, Roland? Are we happy? Or we must change the questions that we ask?
Well, I think don't know if Salikoko will agree, but I think there have been a lot of questions that were not so happy, we would say, because, for example, the most pertinent questions have been in that way. When I was thinking back to a long time ago, I read an article written by Skudnap Kangas and Philipson. It was in TESOL. And I do not really remember everything from this article, but it has been put in a moral way that, that linguistic ecology is better than imposing languages. Okay, I think we are all trying to change situations, to change processes, and so on. But it is not. It's not say, well, now we will be missionaries of linguistic ecology. I would say that linguistic ecology, and in that way, I hope I understood you, Salikoko, that it is something that will tell us, but not is something we have to do. And in this way, I would say that, for example, from my point of view, the questions are not pertinent if we ask what is good and what is bad. Linguistic ecology is good and monolinguism is bad, or something like in that way. I would say just the question should be that which are the complex processes, and I think we agree in this point. in a given, which are the complex processes in a given context, and what should we do if we want them to be changed? Mm-hmm. For me, this generally spoken, these are the questions we have to ask.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, we are about to open a can of worms here. The question of language endangerment is multifaceted. Where ecology becomes particularly relevant is that from a purely academic point of view, not from an activist point of view, we have to try to figure out why languages are dying in the first place. Whether there is any population out there that says, my language is bad, I don't need it, I'll discard it. That leads to the question of how languages die in the first place. And I think that everywhere, language loss catches particular populations by surprise. By hindsight, they look back and notice that they are not speaking their language anymore, or that they have lost fluency in their language. But we have to try to understand why, and that's where ecology becomes particularly relevant, because ecology can help us articulate under what particular conditions two or more languages get in competition with each other.